And then we move on with the topic of quarters or districts. Thank you very much. I'll continue to talk about the quarter or district level, which will also probably be unavoidable in the next presentations. There are parallels, of course, but that's not a bad thing, I think, in this case, because it shows where the most important points are. First of all, we had a very intensive discussion, and I thought there were some really great ideas, and we discussed them in a classic way, sorting them into kind of 3 steps: preliminary studies or preliminary measures, and if necessary, the challenges that arise from this process, especially, of course, for the preservation of historic monuments, because that is our main topic. We talked about the fact that neighborhoods, especially if they have to be considered and developed holistically for more climate resilience in the city, but it can also be like a village or a city quarter. We actually first need to do an integrated preliminary investigation, which is first of all oriented towards climate. So which occurrences are there which have also changed due to climate change? Which ones have been strengthened or weakened by structural interventions? Keyword in this case are high-rise buildings, which on the one hand can somewhat weaken air circulation, but can also very much intensify it and bring drafts with them all year round. There's also a question of where the moisture should come from, which rain directions are there. And this must actually be very well investigated in advance in order to be able to think about changing it at all. An important factor for heating in neighborhoods are, of course, facade materials, like, for example, large mirrored facades, which may provide pleasant light for the interior, but can also intensify quite unpleasant properties on the streets and further promote heating. This is certainly true for some other building materials, which store high temperatures for a very long time. Then we talked about the pavement, so how sealed is a surface, how much heat does it radiate as well. Certainly also have to do with colors and what is on the surface of the pavement. If there's 550 or 100 cars parked there, which also heat up, plus the heating of the ground naturally through the summer heat, and this is all undesirable. And we're not even talking about the whole issue of mobile individual traffic and its effects on the city. Then again, we have, which we also talked about in the group, to look very closely at what climate adaptation measures may already have historical buildings used. Even if we have aggravated situations due to climate change, we're not the first generation to freeze or sweat. And we have building types in various regions that react very well to too much cold or too much heat. And I'm not just referring to the Mediterranean building styles that I mentioned earlier, but also I'm referring to traditional building styles, such as houses with large roofs, thatched roofs, and smaller windows that keep the heat or the cold out effectively. And in this context, it is certainly important to determine heat island, and we have 2 experts from the city of Bamberg here who are very committed to their city and very quickly made it clear that they are very familiar with every street and every square from their use. And we should not forget that this local knowledge is also a very important factor in stock taking. When we come back to the measures, here we have them. First and foremost, we had to take a holistic view, a general view, in order to strengthen the blue-green infrastructure in the entire city. So we've already heard a lot about parks and green spaces and urban greenery in general. We started with this, certainly also under the impression. So we have been able to see again what it means when a region is so affected by heavy rain for 3 or 4 days, and then all water drainage systems fail. Not to mention dikes or flood control measures, but all the urban drainage systems in Emilia-Romagna failed, and that can happen to us in Germany every day as well. So we're really no longer safe anywhere, not just on the north and the Baltic Sea or major rivers. In this respect, I think, and this is not only us or I who think this, but actually all cities should now be thinking under high pressure. Where does the water go? We should also look at the city's hollows without any taboos to see if they can be used as temporary and spontaneous water reservoirs. And from our point of view, we should really take a no-holds-barred approach. There can be underground garages, which is in such cases are no longer particularly suitable for parking cars. They can be historic cellar systems, former oil tanks, historic bunkers in many cities. We're also here in a city that has a large underground second city underneath it. There are cavities that might be, to some extent, not cost neutral, but nevertheless with manageable cost, suitable for the temporary storage of water, which can then possibly be used again in a drought phase for cooling the city. The issue of the use of surface water has also been discussed for decades, as early as the 1920s. People thought about how they can use surface water, so water from showers and washing machines that are just only moderately polluted. How can it be returned to the does it have to be returned to the sewage system, or can it not be used for storage and then later used for cooling? The topic of creating infiltration areas is certainly also important and has made it far into the media. Most recently, whenever there have been major floods, then comes the mantra of politicians and experts who call for the creation of infiltration surfaces. But if we look at our cities, one is more sealed than the other, and I'm gonna get to this in a minute. We certainly need to bring culture change. Taking old branches of rivers and streams as retention areas, reopening streams that flowed through the city and are blocked, are, I think, certainly good ideas. We also just talked about resilient tree species that need to be identified to provide shade and retain moisture. And of course, learning projects are certainly important here because many things can be predicted, but some things can only be tried out when they are actually done and put in practice. And that's already happening a lot today. This reflects of city councils who say that we can't create more green spaces because no one can maintain them. I believe that society as a whole needs to think about the fact that perhaps handing over care to a municipal company cannot be the only solution, and that we need to discuss this again and again. So what level of care do we need? Do we need normal garden standard, everything clean and tidy, or do we need a standard that is geared above all to cooling and providing shade and binding moisture? One problem is not only public areas but also private areas. If you look on Google Maps what's going on in courtyards, then you see that there is often no more greenery but parking spaces. And of course, these are the spaces that, like the public open spaces, absolutely have to become moisture reservoirs. So we also have to think about this. How do you get private open space in the city centers and neighborhoods to work on this overall bigger system? We certainly need incentive systems for unsealing, for carports with green roofs, and so on. So in terms of urban development funding, rethink and an incentive system are certainly necessary. And without going into too much detail, we must think about urban planning, urban development, and precaution. Of course, also when we look at the structural measures in architecture to reduce, for example, reduce window areas if necessary, think about structural sun protection. And of course, we talked about as well the review of historical building strategies in warm countries, so lodges, peristyles, atrium typologies, but also water which flows through buildings and creates cooling, or light shafts and air shafts that are built in from the outset. In the case of district and quarter solutions, we're of course also talking about renewable energy, and here too I just want to point out that we have to, when we make district concepts for cooling, we also have to consider this entire regenerative infrastructure. So solar plants, photovoltaic plants, other maybe future power generators and lines. So the whole transformation and line routing must actually be considered in this context. When we talk about cooling the city, and sometimes also, we're going to have cold winters. We should not leave them completely out of question. We might also have severe frost events. So we cannot avoid talking about the topic of mobility, because cars, which take up a lot of space, that is perhaps also urgently needed as free space for climate resilience, they really stand and fall with it. I'm not talking about CO2 emissions from driving, but first and foremost, I'm talking about stationary traffic, which fills our cities with an incredible amount of space. And I believe that this taboo must be tackled. Otherwise, the spaces for cooling or to adapt to climate change are too small. And in this respect, we are perhaps now also at a point in society where many people commute, or at least some of them. I don't want to get into a fundamental discussion here, but we can't keep going around this elephant in the room. Mobility is a decisive factor, or controlling mobility within cities is a decisive factor for climate resilient cities. And then I would also, and I would like to come to an end. Of course, preservation of historical monuments is always affected, no matter what measures or what one measure for cooling or climate resilience we choose. And we mean not necessarily that one must ask the monument preservation permission, but that knowledge of monument preservation is also taken into consideration quite early, and to demand that monument authorities are asked proactively and they participate into such processes, because sometimes also in the planning, politically or at administration levels, monuments are not concerned or taken into consideration. Even when we talk about all knowledge which concerns building and their characteristics and their possibilities. So maybe there should be a shift in the paradigm in the way we think about preservation of monuments. Maybe away from a reactive form to a more advisory form. Because let's be honest, we will take many measures, and this has already begun in connection with the regenerative energy. Many places will no longer be asked so much as a monument authority, because the laws will be designed in such a way that the most important public interest, the predominant public interest, will be climate protection, less the protection and preservation of monuments. So we monument conservators have to advertise all the more for and be active for the existing buildings and their values and their role in climate change. That's all from my group. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also, especially for underlining this reverse role, that building monuments or monuments are not only victims of climate change, but that actually the knowledge contained in it, the historical knowledge about climate-friendly buildings, for example, and how to adapt to temperature, can be a source of inspiration from which we can learn a lot. We've talked about a lot of points. Maybe let's talk about sealing for a second, which was a very important point. In the Netherlands, there are many gardens that are partially sealed with small paving slabs, plates, or very modern, in modern ways. So instead of having grass, they have pebbles. And here there's a very simple form of subsidy to counteract that, in which municipalities and cities and building, they take away the construction waste free of charge if you remove the ceiling. So it's relatively straightforward, and it's not really expensive, but it's a very big incentive for privates. You can look at taking out the slabs or getting rid of the gravel or breaking up the little asphalt area, and I think it has a pretty big impact, as we can see a lot of change in urban areas. Are there any questions about this topic, the topic of neighborhoods, or comments, additions, critiques?